Hello, everybody. As said, I'm Jackie Rowe. I'm Deputy Programme Director for Delivery on Thames Tideway Tunnel. I work for Jacobs, the Programme Manager and Project Manager, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about the project. I'm an engineer, so I can't help that, I'm sorry. And then a little bit how NEC has really helped us and some of the challenges and some of the things that we've learned along the way. We are in mid-flow, so we're right in the thick of it, and so some of those challenges are coming out right now. So I might be a little bit cagey in some circumstances. Okay, back in the mid-1800s in London, our rivers became quite polluted. In fact, they were open sewers. And back in the day, we had something known as the Great Stink. I'm sure you've all heard of it, where even the members of the Houses of Parliament had to leave the city because the stench was so poor. And Sir Joseph Bazalgette came up with an idea and built interceptor sewers that effectively intercepted all of those rivers, picked up the flows, took them out east and let east worry about the smell, and the city was perfect. In doing so, those interceptor sewers were fantastic through a series of pumping stations, pumping everything out east, nearer to the sea and taking us away from the tidal Thames and that stinking town. Those sewers are still fantastic today. They are in fantastic shape, still doing the same job. They were designed to take sewage and also rainfall, and were designed for 4 million people. The population at the time was 2 million, but we have a little problem now, and that little problem is the City of London or London itself has a population of 9 million people. Those sewers take sewage and they take rainwater, and with 9 million, they're pretty well filling up with the sewage, and so 2 millimetres of rainfall can cause those sewers to overtop. Now, we don't want that backing up into our homes and into the flats and into our properties, and so what happens is that those overtop through combined sewer overflows. There are 50 plus of those overflows along the River Thames, and as I say, with 2 millimetres of rainfall, those can overtop, and on an average year, there's 50 million cubic metres of sewage goes into the River Thames through these CSOs. A little fact that if the sewage comes in at, say, Putney, way upstream, because the Thames is tidal and that tide comes in and out every day, twice a day, it can take up to 3 months for that sewage to get from Putney out to sea, which doesn't do a great thing for our ecosystem and certainly the ecosystem of Thames, the River Thames, and so that's why we are building the Thames Tideway Tunnel. The Thames Tideway Tunnel is the solution, 25 kilometres long, running from Acton in the west all the way to Abbey Mills in the east. It runs along the route of the Thames. We're underneath the Thames, down the middle of the Thames. It is 7.2 metres diameter, and we have 21 sites. And those 21 sites, 3 of those are main drive sites, the other 18 are interceptor sites. And effectively, this big sewer is one big storage tank, and instead of flows going into the Thames, we capture them, we get them into our tunnel, we hold them into the tunnel until Beckton Sewage Treatment Works out east is ready to receive the flows, and then we pump them up, we treat it, and we put it out to the Thames. And the idea of this whole programme is to clean up the River Thames. That's what we're doing. Here's a typical combined sewer overflow site. So we have an interception chamber into the existing sewers. We have a massive big drop shaft. The flows are intercepted. They flow down the drop shaft. We have a vortex in that drop shaft to make sure that we don't entrain lots of air. And then there's a connection tunnel into our main tunnel. The drop shafts themselves, big storage tank too. It's all part of the volume. And as you can see from that site there, that's an example of our Victoria site. And if you walk across Westminster Bridge, you can see our Victoria site in full flow. That's the infrastructure that we're building around. Procurement strategy then. So we wanted to split the risk a little bit in terms of not giving this all to one main works contractor. And so the nature of the tunnel, if you can see it here in the west, that tunnel at 30 metres to about 40 metres is in clay. In the middle, we're going through gravels, and then as you get out east, we're into chalk. And so, being that the tunnel is the biggest thing that we're going to be building, we decided to split the contract by geology, such that the tunnel boring machine that you were going to buy is the right one for the job. And we split it effectively there, with interfaces at Carnworth Road and at Chambers Wharf between the west and central and east. So just a little contract overview here then. So we've got Jacobs as the programme manager, Tideway is the employer. We've got a link to Thames Water, so Tideway is quite independent from Thames Water, but Thames Water will be the operator of the sewer, and Thames Water also collects the revenue from the customers that pays for the project. So there's a little route and there's lots of agreements between Tideway and Thames Water. And we split the contracts into East, West and Central, as discussed, and they're NEC contracts, and our main works contractors are B&B, that's Balfours, Morgans and BAM, a Flow, which is for overall Lang O'Rourke, and then CVB, Costain, Banshee and Bashi. But we also have a programme-wide system integrator for the SCADA. So the three main works contracts, we've got NEC option C, which is a target contract, which allows that split of 50-50. We've got world-class contractors on board. We want to take opportunity of their expertise and allow that sharing, not only in the risk, but also sharing in the gain of some bright ideas. When you write the contract and you write the works information and you set out the scope, sometimes you might not be the brightest one in the room, and we want to take advantage of that. With the system integrator, a much smaller contract, that's to bring the SCADA together across the piece to tie up the controls across East, West and Central, but also tie into Thames Water. Much smaller contract, that's an NEC option E, so cost reimbursable. Much smaller contract, much better control of scope, but also much more widely impacted by the three main works contractors. And therefore, in order to control that and manage that more effectively, we put that as an option E. NEC contracts, one of the reasons for using NEC contract is working together, coming up, getting the best and the brightest in the room to come up with the best solution for the best for the project. On top of the NEC contracts, because of working alongside with Thames Water, and also because we are a programme where East, West and Central, whilst we may have split them, it's one system. If one contractor finishes, we can't sign it off until they're all done and we've tested the system as a whole. And therefore, we put this alliance agreement on top of the contracts. It's separate from the NEC, so if the alliance agreement was to fall away, NEC still maintained, but the alliance agreement has no scope around it. It's all about working together to a common goal to encourage and incentivise against an overall programme, an overall cost, and some legacy targets and KPIs, which Tideway have committed in terms of their legacy. It's in the NEC contracts to hit a certain level in terms of that KPI. The alliance agreement says if we work together, we might get even better than that, and if we get better than that, then we can incentivise you against that. So it's an encouraging to work even better together across the contracts with our clients, and also with our partner and an alliance partner in Thames Water as the operator. Delivery challenges. So on a complex major infrastructure project, the challenges are all the same, whether it's a smaller project or a bigger project. It's just the impact might be a little bit bigger on our major contract. But the challenges that we have, ground conditions, not as we might find them. Working in the river, on the river, under the river. Working alongside neighbours. We've got 21 sites across London, and our neighbours, our main drive site at Chambers Wharf, you can pretty well stick your hand out and touch the building next door. That's how close we are to our neighbours, and we have to work very hard to work with them and control that. Working with Thames Water's 150-year plus old assets and connecting in, working and protecting them, a challenge all in itself. And again, one of the reasons for having the alliance is to work together with Thames Water to come up with the best solution for that. And then there's a little picture there that shows all the infrastructure that we pass along the way. Many third-party assets that we have to protect and maintain along the way. So, overcoming some of those challenges. Anticipation. So anticipation in the contract. What can we put into the contract to allow our main works contractors to understand the risk and to price that risk appropriately and to share that risk appropriately. So things like ground condition, we put a geological baseline report in the contract such that anything that says in the geological baseline report, that's what you should have anticipated, that's what you should work for, that's not a compensation event. Anything outside of that is the client's risk. And it's that balance of risk to allow a sensible tender process and a sensible price to come in. Third-party asset condition reports, again, putting those reports out there for all those major third-party assets. We're not going to pick them all up. There are thousands of them, but in terms of those major ones, real condition reports to allow that risk to be managed and priced accordingly. Exceptional equipment, and this is so equipment under the NEC. A main works contractor doesn't get paid for it until it hits site. When you're buying a tunnel boring machine at millions of pounds, that's a lot of money to be holding on to and not getting paid for until it hits sites. So we class it as exceptional equipment, and then we have the opportunity that said, as long as we get an advance payment bond in place, we can pay you early and we keep that cash flow going and we can keep that moving. And it's a good use of the contract to allow that money to keep coming in. Interfaces between contracts, we have tried in the contract, and I'll perhaps come to that at the lessons learned at the end, to anticipate where we're going to be working together, how we're going to work together, and set out a baseline of how that might work. I think the only thing you can guarantee with any major infrastructure project and any contract is things will change, but it's a baseline. And then again, sewer access, setting out that baseline for how we interface with Thames Water, what are the boundaries in which it is compensatable for not getting in and not compensatable. You know, we're working together in alliance, but ultimately there still needs to be boundaries under the contract. So, as I said, guaranteed, the only thing guaranteed is that there will be change and managing that relationship. So, early warnings. We have used early warnings to the hilt and in the right way, highlighting on both sides when things are coming up. For big things, for small things, tackling them together. But the key is the relationships. The key is coming together and working together to get the right answer for the project, for the contract. And with us, with 3 main works contracts together, and in an alliance, the best for project might not be the best for contract, and we need to address that and look at that in the way and come up with the right solution. And so, hence, we have that alliance agreement, which allows us to come together as an alliance and maybe come together and get a solution out of that, which may mean that the client will need to instruct certain solutions along the way to get to the right answer. It's about finding the optimum solution, so it is about leaving the commercials at the door and trying to get the right solution and then coming back, trusting that we're working together and we will compensate accordingly and fairly and reasonably. And that's a big word, isn't it, trust? And part of that is co-location. Our Network Rail colleague talked about co-location. It's not just co-location in the right building, it's not co-location on the right floor, it's co-location. Leadership team sat with leadership team, commercial team sat with commercial team, controls team sat with controls team. Really effective way of making sure those relationships and that conversation keeps going. We won't always agree. We might go and pilfer off into little rooms to have conversations, but the fact of the matter is we're sat and talking and overhearing and having those conversations. Unlocking constraints. So within the contract, we looked about passing risk, and risk sat with the right people. And under our contracts, we said associated with, we pass quite a bit of risk across in terms of the consenting and saying that our main works contractor is responsible for gaining consents, working with third parties and that relationship with it. But actually, when something goes wrong, or not go wrong, but an event happens that you weren't anticipating, for example, at our site at Blackfriars, the third-party asset was not quite as we expected, a gas main, which may mean that we would have to move the gas main. That could impact 18 months on the project, 2 years on the project. Who knows what that might be. It's using the relationships we have throughout the organisations, be it on the client side, be it in the project manager, be it in the main works contractor, coming together to use the relationships and the right connectivity to get the right result, and unlocking constraints. Unlocking constraints might be with our third parties, it might be within the works information itself, it might be within the planning permission that we have. Any of those areas, we need to look at that. Whilst we have a contract, sometimes the best solution needs something to be unlocked. Keeping the job moving. For me, the NEC, the biggest success about the NEC is the way in which we pay. We keep paying for the defined costs as we spend. So that means that our main works contractors are whole as we go forward and still have that cash flow, such that hopefully anything that has landed and any commercials that you are working through do not impact on delivery, because the cash flow is still there, guaranteed, because that's the payment method. Management of risk, talked about that a little bit. We need to, at Blackfriars site, it was quite a fundamental change in design, a fundamental change in methodology to get us to the right solution. And in so doing, we actually looked at that management of risk and saying, in working through the answer here, we don't know what the end game is going to be. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. And actually, should we consider carving out that particular site, that particular piece of work, and commercially looking at that in a different way and saying, actually, do you go to cost reimbursable on that specific piece to get us over the hurdle that is quite significantly different? And so, you know, as a client, as a project manager has to manage the contract in accordance with the contract. As a program manager, you take a step back and say, is this the right thing for the project? Is it the right thing for the client and the main works contractor? Is this real success? And really looking at that in the right way and saying, is there a different way? And making recommendations sometimes to the client, say, actually, maybe there's a different way of doing this that will get a better result. And so just those considerations as you go that says, whilst the contract's there, let's be a little bit flexible sometimes, and if it's the right result. And then when it comes to compensation, trust that we're going to do the right thing, but also give ourselves time to resolve. We may need to instruct a design that will actually feed the end result. Accepted programs, I think in the earlier session we talked about, are we competent enough, and I would recommend to any project manager try not to be too clever about this acceptance of program and saying, oh, what if? Actually, it's a baseline at a point in time. Unless something's fundamentally wrong with it, we should be accepting it and then moving forward. And then again, as I said, internal escalation process, where there have been difficulties or challenges against our contract and we are in disagreement. We don't want to go straight to adjudication. Again, we want some form of internal escalation process that allow us to say, what's the bigger picture? Is there more information that we can find? Is there anything that we can unlock? And that's been pretty successful as we've gone along, keeping things moving and shutting things down. Lessons, consideration for future major projects. So, maintaining the intent and ethos, clause 10.1, mutual trust and cooperation is absolutely key. Co-location for me, absolutely key. I think we've seen across our contracts, they're all a little bit different, and we've seen co-location in a little different way. Some sat teams together, and my counterpart is here, and from CBB, I worked out in the East, and we moved our teams around. When the relationship wasn't working, we moved our teams around so that we could get those better relationships, and it's absolutely key to keeping things moving. Balance of risk. Our contract was far from a vanilla NEC, and caution to clients. Clients are very powerful teams that can really change the NEC from a cooperative, reasonable contract into one where the risk is all sat in the wrong place. And just to be cautious, making sure that when we put Z clauses in, that we don't change that balance so significantly. Clarity at baseline, use that works information to the best that you can in terms of setting that baseline. Everybody knows where they are. Main works contractors can price it appropriately if they understand the risk and they understand what they're taking, what they're not. And keep it simple. The more you change, the more difficult it gets to manage it. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you so much, Jeff.